Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 277, featuring the amazing Ben Procter. I have wanted to have Ben on the podcast probably since we began, Kristen. I'm thinking forever, because I've known Ben for a long, long time, and he's an incredible person, but he has been extremely busy and has not necessarily been able to come on, but somehow there was a little bit of easy time where he was able to come on because of COVID. And it's been pretty amazing, but he's been working for the last, 7 years, I said on the
Yep,
podcast?
7.
7 years. What has he been working on?
Avatar, the sequel.
Yeah.
So excited.
Yeah, he's been working on Avatar forever, ever. And yeah, that's his investment right now. And they're filming the second and third, but I think there's going to be a lot more of it. Sounds like there are plans for like 4 more or 5 more of these Avatar movies. So, you're excited, right?
Yes, I love Avatar.
Really?
I see you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Big
All right.
fan.
Yep. Titanic too, I'm sure. So you're a Cameron fan.
It's my number one. Yeah.
You're a big Cameron fan. Well, that's great. So yeah, Ben has been an awesome. He's a concept artist, art director, creative director, and really cool guy. I met him a long time ago before I even went into visual effects. He was working at PLF. Which is Pixar Liberation Front, which was really cool. You guys should listen to the Colin Green episode that I did with him for that. But I also work with him more directly on Tron. So he was working on Tron. And it was sort of the first time I've been able to work with the concept art department much more directly, because they were creating the assets in 3D. And at the time, that was a really novel idea. Now it's actually much more common, but it was kind of novel and kind of awesome to have that. And it was really cool to talk to Ben. Obviously, he's had a really rich history. What are some of the takeaways that you had, obviously, besides being excited about Avatar?
Well, he's worked on so many large blockbuster films. It was insane. And you guys also talk about kind of how, even though with COVID, with Avatar right now, their timeline for release is still going strong, and they're able to do it virtually. So that was cool. You guys touched on that.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about how like art department works with the visual production right now. And he says like how the physical is still needed, and it is very beneficial in the virtual process as well. So I liked hearing about that. So.
Yeah. He was really great about sort of describing all of those different things, and doing that. And he's a really cool, soft-spoken person. I really like Ben. He's a very smart guy and really into what he does. So it was pretty awesome to talk to him and to have that sort of input from him, and get a little bit more about all of that stuff. So really cool to have Ben on and to do about that. Do we have any announcements? We have just a couple of things we want to announce, right?
Yep, a couple quick announcements, and you can find all this at chaosgroup.com. But we have 2 updates. We have V-Ray for Houdini Update 1 just came out, and then our V-Ray Next for Revit Update 1 is available.
Right. So we announced Revit last week. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going on there, but Houdini is a big one as well. So you guys should definitely check out some of the Houdini updates. I know some of you big VFX nerds are going to want to check that out, because obviously it's a big update on that side. This is not a V-Ray 5 update. This is just a update from Next from some of the features. So just keep that in mind. In terms of V-Ray 5 for Max Beta is out. So if you guys are interested in V-Ray 5 and finding out all the brand new features, this is the 3ds Max is the first platform that we're putting it out on. You should definitely check it out, and you can go check it out at chaosgroup.com as well. So go do that, V-Ray 5 for 3ds Max Beta. And I think that's all we're going to announce today, right? Oh, I do want to note that we are doing this as a video, but this was the early days. We recorded this early days of us going into isolation, and we didn't really have the brilliant idea of recording video back then. So there is no video of Ben. So we're still going to put the video up just to keep continuity, because apparently some people, including Vlado, likes to watch the YouTubes or listen to the YouTubes while he's working. He likes that version. So we're going to keep video thing going on YouTube, even though we're not doing video. So just a note, it's just Kristen and I on video now, but then after that, you're going to switch to just a still image after this. So, all right. All right. Anything else, Kristen? If people want to find out more about the podcast, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaosgroup.com/CG Garage.
Great. And of course, remember on our Facebook page, we are actually posting the videos up there as well. So you guys can check that out. And make sure you give us feedback, if any ideas. And if you want to give us any new ideas, we've been getting some great ones. Go to labs@chaosgroup.com. You can email us there if you have any comments, questions, or ideas for guests. Please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. That being said, please enjoy this awesome podcast with Mr. Ben Proctor.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
And I have started recording. So a couple things we're going to do first. So normally, I know you've listened to some of my podcasts and you've seen a couple of them, right? Mm-hmm. And we normally do Polaroids, but of course I can't be with people in person anymore, so I can't do the Polaroids. So what I actually have is I forgot to bring it in here to show you, but I have a machine that is basically you take your phone and you put it on top and it spits out a Polaroid.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It takes a Polaroid. It's basically like makes a physical Instagram of your Instagram. It's
That's
really
super
funny.
Cool. Wow.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of you and I'm going to make that into something. All right. So we're going to use that. Yeah, got it. Perfect.
Alrighty.
All right. We're good. All right, Ben. I have actually been wanting to have you on the podcast for a very long time. And I don't know, can you say what movie you've been working on for the last 7 years?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And you've got the right number. It's been 7 years. I've been on the Avatar sequels since late 2013. So yeah, it's been quite a while.
Yeah.
It's hard even for me to believe.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I remember people saying the same thing when they were on the first Avatar, like some of the concept artists on that. They said, I've been working on that for they were 10 years.
There were people who'd been picking away at it for many, many years. I think there was an initial phase where they were working at Jim's house, way back in the day. And then there was a more recent one that led up to the period where I was working, where again, they were out at Jim's house in Malibu and working with him, which must have been cool.
Right.
But then, yeah, I mean, let's see, for me, it was a year and a half, which is a long, long time, but I was also on Transformers 1 for a year and a half. So it was not unprecedented for me. At that point, but 7 years is a different deal. I mean, you work for a company now, so you understand. Yeah. That for me, as someone who normally works as a freelance, in fact, a union employee of movie productions, to be working for this length of time for one employer is just bizarre. Like with the same people for that many years, it's bizarre. It's just not how it's supposed to be. I should be working on something for 3 months, 9 months, a year and a half, whatever. But no complaints. It's been terrific. The Avatar team from top to bottom. I mean, right from, Jim and John, who's terrific, our producer, to everybody, the hundreds of people that are working on it. If you had to be stuck with a certain family of coworkers for that long, I think we're all in good company. So no complaints there.
That's great to hear. Now, because I think there's a lot of misinformation about it. And so you would know best. How many avatars are being produced right now? How many films are being produced? Does anyone know? Can you tell me that?
So we have scripts and initial concept art for 4 new movies. Right. Okay. Originally, there were 3 scripts. So there were 3 planned sequels. It turned out that the what was going to be Avatar 2 had so much amazing story in it that it literally couldn't fit into a movie at the end of the day. Right. So that got split. So the Avatar 2 and 3 that we are currently finishing out, I guess you'd say we're in post now. We're in a strange state of being both in the middle of live action in the sense that we've done a stint of live action photography, but we still are going to do at least one more, right?
Right.
But at the same time in post, right? Because it's such a heavily digital movie that that a huge amount of virtual production is completely wrapped, and all the motion editing and all of the actual film editing and Jim's specific virtual camera moves and everything that goes into the finishing pipeline of Avatar. That's all has already been started, obviously, and Weta Digital has been working on shots for quite a long time in certain cases. But that turnover pipeline process is now in full gear. So I guess to answer your question, there are 4 new potential avatars out there, right? We are in the middle of producing basically 2 and 3 concurrently, if I can say that. I mean, the emphasis clearly is a lot more on 2 because we got to get that finished and get it out.
When
of the
is
theaters.
that coming out?
So holiday 2021 is 2.
Okay, so we still have like almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years, which in normal world is like, oh wow, we could make like 4 movies in that time, but in Avatar world means, just because of the complexity of what we're doing and the ambition of what we're doing, means that we're under the gun. So
wow.
But we're still going. I mean, despite the coronavirus shutdown of so many things, I feel terrible to say this, in front of my industry colleagues, but we are still going. We've gone to a virtual office sort of a setup. And so far, it seems to be working pretty well. We have meetings and reviews and everything that we normally do.
It is interesting to see the things that can work and things that can't work, because there are things that can work. And if you have the internet has been basically saving everyone's jobs.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
It's amazing that it's holding up. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that, but the fact that the bandwidth of the internet is actually holding up right now, given the amount of video being thrown around, is insane, including what we're doing right now.
Well, I know. This going on, the amount of video conferences going on, the amount of Netflix streaming that's going on, and it's working. So it's probably just about to burst, but
it's probably about to burst, exactly.
But if we have been able to operate basically for the last few weeks this way, it's been pretty interesting. I find it fascinating. But before we get to, I know we've already started and what's going to happen in your future, but let's go back to the past, because that's always something that's interesting. And I remember the first time I met you in person was at PLF. You were still at PLF.
Was it then? That's so funny, because I would have said Tron, but I forgot that we met before that.
Yeah,
awesome.
Because I was first moved to LA, and I was interested in finding out more about the visual effects world and stuff like that. And of course, Eric Hansen, who's introduced everyone to everyone.
Exactly.
He's the one who introduced me to you. And so I said, hey, I'd love to go visit you at PLF. And I went there, and you guys were just crammed full of people. It was the first time I'd seen one of those situations where
there was no social
elbow
distancing,
to elbow.
that's for sure.
Yeah, elbow to elbow working.
Yeah.
And I think I met, for a brief second, you introduced me to Colin Green.
Yeah.
And he's actually been on the podcast.
Has he? Terrific.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's been on.
I'm ashamed to admit I've only listened to like 4 of your podcasts, but I've enjoyed every single one. So I've got to expand my reading.
But
so to speak.
PLF was kind of an interesting thing. That was obviously, that was the days when the idea of previs was kind of a new thing. And, and there was a really cool thing. So what landed you at PLF? How did you end up there?
Well, look, I'll start, if I can, at my very first quote-unquote Hollywood job, was working at a tiny little kind of fly-by-night matte painting company run by a guy whose name I won't mention, who's not highly regarded by some of the people that worked for him at that time. And it was literally in Hollywood, and I had to commute to like the shadow of the Capitol Records building, and I felt like, oh my God, I've moved from New York out to LA. I'm really doing it. But we were also working literally like slaves, and I was so tired. I got in a car accident, and as a New Yorker, I didn't know how to drive very well. I was just learning literally on the fly in LA how to drive, and it was a nightmare.
How old were you at this point?
I guess I must have been. That's a great question. 26, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were really New Yorker, where
I was a New Yorker. Exactly. No, good point. Right. So yeah, but at that age, I had not yet learned to drive, and I did a little bit of learning in Manhattan from a company that mainly specialized in training like big rig drivers. So that this 26-year-old idiot wandering in who didn't know how to drive a car was not treated with much respect, and I had some hijinks. Sorry, I'm going off topic, but
that's fine.
One driver, a teacher, I should say, came in with a boombox and smoking, right? Like gets into the car, puts the boombox on the dash, almost blocking my view, hits play on whatever it was, starts smoking. He's like, "All right, go."
And this is your teacher.
This
Oh
is
my God.
teacher, and it had a double control. So he got me onto the West Side Highway, which anybody who knows New York is kind of like as close to a freeway as you get, right? It's like a several lane, like 2 or 3 lane highway, effectively, that runs around the island, right? So he gets us out of there, and he's like, "All right, you go. It's yours now." And I take control. He's like, "All right, change lanes, do this, that." So he had me essentially doing kind of freeway driving in Manhattan, and I didn't know. And anyway, I almost got us killed. And he was like, "What happened there?" Dude, I don't know how to drive. That's what happened there. What do you think? So anyway,
wow.
Somehow I survived my crash in LA, as I moved out here. And so basically that was my first job. And then PLF, frankly, was just one of the guys that was working at the matte painting company, said, "Hey, here's a few job listings I've seen." It was like literally a random job listing kind of deal. And so I went in. I had no particular interest, or not even interest, I should say knowledge of previs or what PLF did. Obviously, I found it interesting once I got there. But at that point, my brain in terms of wanting to be in movies was much more about CG and visual effects and, wanting to be like a texture artist at a Pixar kind of a thing or whatever. It was much less related to live action.
Come from? Where did that interest in CG come from?
I think, growing up in New York, I didn't know a whole lot about the industry, and I certainly didn't know people who were in the movie making industry.
Right.
I grew up around advertising, so I certainly knew a bit of what it's like to do a shoot and then edit it and go into sound mixing studios and all that. I sort of had some exposure to media, but not to movie making per se. I think I just became fascinated, particularly with the rise of Pixar. We got to remember, in the 90s and into the early 2000s was the explosion of the quality of rendering that Pixar was doing. I mean, I remember when A Bug's Life came out, I was like blown away by the iridescent shaders on the beetle and, all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, they were really innovating. And so between that and the Final Fantasy movie and other things that were happening, I think I just thought that high-end CG animated stuff was just super cool, and I wanted to be involved in it, or visual effects, just because it was the world creation, the wide digital matte shot. It was that, the design world creating aspect of kind of movie making, as opposed to the filmmaking storytelling aspect. Anyway, the good news about being at PLF is that by being forced into previs, I got a huge exposure to the live action side of things that I just had no idea about.
Right.
And I'll give a lot of credit to Colin, and the overall approach. I can't speak to what he's been up to lately, but at the time, he sort of prided himself on being very technical about his approach, right, and very accurate to the kind of film equipment that you'd be using, and how you could sort of pre-visualize the limitations of that in order to figure out how you'd really do something, right?
Sure.
And I think being exposed to that and the kind of precision that he brought to the process as an architect, as you and Eric also bring to it, right?
Right.
I think was great. A great discipline. I got some good habits from working for him and at PLF. I think that have really helped me.
Yeah. And he was historically a big soft homage guy. You and as were you.
It's not even as was I. It's as am I. It's kind of pathetic, but I'm still running it.
You're still running it? Wow.
I'm still running it. The truth is these days I don't do a whole lot of 3D. If I do anything artistic, with the management stuff that I'm doing, it's more Photoshop paint overs or whatever.
Sure.
Investing the time in doing 3D and setup and renders and all that. It's something that I used to do a lot, and I still really enjoy, but I just don't have the time for it. But So effectively, I kind of am just not a 3D user all that much right now at all. Right. But yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, I downloaded the Cinema 4D demo last night to try to stay up and start messing around with it. And God, I'm just the worst.
J.R.R. Martin, he writes all the Game of Thrones stuff in DOS on a DOS computer with WordStar.
Are you serious?
Yeah, because he says it's never crashed on me ever.
That's amazing. I wish I could say that of Softimage.
So Softimage is like to you is like, no, I'm sticking with it because it's a great package, and it is a shame.
Yeah.
I think it got it got, what's the word?
The shaft.
Disappropriated.
Yeah.
The shaft. It got deprecated
There you
in
go.
an unfair way because you're right. It is a really good package, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, it didn't. It was just too much for Autodesk to maintain everything. So,
Indeed.
but I think it's. Yeah, it was really kind of interesting. I remember talking to you about some of the stuff you guys were doing there, and it was an eye opening to me as well, because to me it was the first time I sort of like one of the first times I got to really be in a visual effects facility and see how it was done, and seeing Colin, who was also an ex-architect, and seeing his perspective. So he kind of knew where I was coming from.
Yeah.
But you were showing me, some of the stuff that I don't know if you had done, but it was at least on their reel. It was the figuring out how to shoot the plane crash sequence on Fight Club. And it was the previs,
Yeah.
and it was all in soft image, and you were showing like how the crane would operate and the motion control and
Yeah.
how everything would work. And I was like, oh. And it was like,
It's amazing stuff.
figuring out, it wasn't just about the CG, it was like how to make the shot work. And you were saying, not only did this work, but this saved, lots and lots of time and energy for the director and the DP to figure out how the hell they're going to shoot this. Like, it's all
Yeah.
planned, just do it this way and it'll work. Right.
Absolutely.
And it was the first time I started, and I was still working in architecture time. I was like, oh my God, this is figuring stuff out. And of course it made sense, because like an architect would try to think of something like that, right? The CG guys would like just want to focus on doing the CG and not worry about the other part.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, it's true.
Really,
but an architecture background, where it's all about the precision required to make things work in the real world, right? Down to millimeters and fastener choices and everything else, right?
Right.
And engineered loads and tolerances and all the stuff that architects worry about. That's a good mindset for figuring out, the actual brass tacks of getting something shot.
Right.
Precision is required, and CG, as I've discovered on Avatar, and other situations, obviously, CG is the ultimate playground of sloppiness if you want it to be, right? It just doesn't matter. Like, you can make something interpenetrating with another thing, and in the final render in the shot, if you don't see it, it just doesn't matter, right? It's like, right. And there's a truth to that, but at the same time, it can kind of like give people what I would call somewhat bad habits, right? So
it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember when I went to DD and I started working on Day After Tomorrow, and I had to build buildings, right? But I've been building buildings the whole time. I was like, oh, right. It's like, it's back there. Don't worry about it. I was like, oh, yeah, I don't. And I realized,
Yeah.
So it was like architecture. I built everything to 1/8 inch accuracy, right?
Yes.
And in CG, it's like 1 pixel accuracy.
Right.
If it's off by a pixel, it's okay.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, right. And you're right. It is sloppy, but there is a lot of other things that have become extreme, minutia of thinking about details in CG as well.
Well, that's right. That's right. The detail comes in different ways. And of course, the techniques of sub-D modeling and other of the softer, gooier aspects of CG, modeling and rendering, and that whole sensibility have made their way back into architecture.
Right.
So,
it's true. It's true. So somehow from the world of previs and PLF, you migrated, and I remember when this sort of happened, you migrated into the world of art direction and became an art director. And he's like, yep, I'm doing this, and I've got, an art director. I'm an art director now, and I've joined a guild. And you basically, he's like, I'm done with that. And I was like, that was fascinating. So explain that transition. How did that happen?
So look, I mean, I would say that I started as that kid or that young person in New York wanting to get into movies. I definitely had an eye toward the design aspect of things. I think I kind of didn't necessarily even realize the separation between design and execution in the film industry, right?
Right.
It was kind of all one thing to me. So if I saw a shot of a cool spaceship in a movie, I thought, it was all of one cloth. Whereas in fact, the truth is, there's a lot of different crafts that come together to enable that to happen, right?
Yeah.
So the design sort of DNA of it was always in my brain, in my aspirations, and so. But what was great about PLF was that it exposed me, number one, to the physical truth of the fact that there are art departments with cool, talented people who are sitting there being paid to draw and design exclusively, right? So the experience of being on the Matrix sequels and being at the Eon, production place down in Venice and meeting, George Hull and Simon Merton and these guys who were doing incredible work. I mean, in some cases it was digital, in some cases it was pencil, in some cases it was, combination, Jeff Darrow, all these guys. So, getting to pal around with them a teeny bit as I had the courage to step outside the previs area and actually make conversation with these guys. I was exposed to that and I thought it was amazing. And then also, PLF gave me the opportunity to do small scale visual effects projects where effectively there just wasn't the design input, right? You just it was of a scale that there was nothing to work from. And so you had to design on the fly and in many cases just make crap up with very little input. Some of these, music video directors just literally would give you no input. Not a little bit, like none. You had to just make something up. And, but that was a great experience to be able to, sort of think on your feet and design quickly and then execute that in CG quickly in a way that was somewhat efficient and all that. So I think, at that point, I thoroughly set my sights on, I want to go into that world of art departments, but bring the CG skills and bring 3D skills, which was my main selling point at that point. I'm still not the greatest 2D illustrator in the world, but certainly at the time I was just, stronger than average 3D illustrator. In fact, I was on the wave in such a way that I was probably one of the first that were kind of not just modeling and making awesome stuff in Rhino or whatever, but actually producing more rendered, well-lit looking images, right?
Right.
So I just, happened to be at that right place in that right time, learning those skills. And then I'll give a lot of credit to Ron Frankel, who actually left PLF to make his own company, Proof, which is still around. And he gave me the chance to work essentially as a previs artist, but then transitioning into doing more rendered versions of the things I was working on. And then that was on The Terminal, Spielberg movie with Alex McDowell production designing. And that gave me the chance to get into the union as an illustrator, which is what I was for a long time. Before I ever art directed in film, I was an illustrator for many years.
Okay.
So that's where I made that jump. And from there on, once you've paid your union dues of thousands of dollars, you want to make the best of it and stick with it. So I stuck with it.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know you worked with Alex McDowell as well. He's been on as well, actually.
All right, we'll definitely have to listen to that one.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's got he toured with the Sex Pistols for a while, so I don't know.
Did he? That's actually, I think some of their graphic work was some of his earliest work, right?
Yeah,
early paste up poster type stuff. Yeah.
It's all his. He's a very interesting person. But anyway, so that sort of ended up, getting you into that art director's world, and I think you worked on. You said the Transformer stuff, right? I remember some of your early Transformer designs. And it was one of the first times, honestly, that I was so used to seeing, as at that point I was working in visual effects, and I was so used to seeing basically traditional drawing concept art for so long and saying, here it is, here's a sketch or whatever, make this, right? And I was like, okay. And it's just challenging. You have to make it from nothing, right? And you have to figure it out. But it wasn't until I was on Tron that basically I got there and you guys were next to us, right? And so you was like, here's a model. You can at least use this at least as a base of something, And it was like, wow, it was the first time you could see something in 3 dimensions and work with it in 3 dimensions that was concept. And I remember, talking to you on Tron, I was like, this is changing everything. This is making my life so much easier. And not only that, I think it was between Digital Domain and you, David Levy ended up sitting right next to me on the light bike.
He stayed on, right? Yeah.
He did. And so he and I worked together on the light bike sequence. So he's like, that's not going to look right. Let me design a new light or let me design a new floor. Yeah. And he would redesign it and we would see it in the final shot, his design, like the next day.
Unbelievable.
I know that sounds like, okay, that's great. It's like it used to be like 2 years between the illustration and the shot. Yeah. And we were doing it in a matter of a day. Creatively, that's just such a better workflow.
It's
so
amazing.
Much better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what typically happened in the old days, and I've been on, I think, both ends of this, is that there was just this information chasm between the production and the art department that was catering to the production, and then post. Right. There was a time gap. There was a personnel gap. Production designers were not held on for long enough to help handhold that transition well enough,
Right.
and it's probably not out of any lack of interest from the designers. It was more just kind of the culture, that I don't know that the production side saw the benefit to paying some expensive person to stay on to be involved in post. It just didn't even make sense to them. But as we know, as movies have gotten more digital, and as there's scarcely a pixel of a shot that doesn't somehow integrate, live action and virtual and have set extension and everything else. These kinds of crossovers are super important. And I think, I give a lot of credit to Darren Guilford, who's a terrific production designer, and Joe Kaczynski, who I know Joe had been at DD doing the test piece with you guys before. Were you involved in the teaser, the test?
I was not involved in the teaser.
Okay. No. But I mean, huge credit to him as a guy who, again, another architect, right? Somebody who's into computer graphics for their own sake and is kind of a geek about it, seeing the benefit of really embracing digital filmmaking and digital look dev and all that stuff that you guys did so well in that teaser that we just kind of had to follow it in the movie to an extent anyway. Anyway, a lot of credit to them, but they set up, I would say, a really, really smart deal, which was, that we had a big art department that was digitally savvy, I think, from day one, right? Yep. I mean, Darren himself, as an example, 3D modeled, the giant rectifier ship himself in SketchUp, right? He modeled it himself. And the city, we changed it and we improved it and we developed it more, but he modeled that city in SketchUp, himself.
Yeah.
So he's a guy who's very 3D
now
savvy
sounds,
too.
but back then that was like a big deal. Like and I remember my friend Christy, she's an art director as well. So she actually, did she work on? No, she did not work on Avatar. Stefan worked. He was on the art department of Avatar.
Stefan Decken was, yes.
Yeah. So his wife was, I went to architecture school with her.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so she was an art director, and she was telling me, like, she would come from architecture school and went to become an art director. And then they were like, she wanted to use a CAD program to sort of design how the building was going to be built on set. And we're like, no, it's like, had to be drafted by hand. I'm like,
yes.
Why can't I mean, computers have been around for a long time. So it seems like it was an uphill battle to get digital into art departments in some ways.
I think that's true. And I also think that something has been lost in the fact that digital won. I sort of, again, see that from both sides too. Anybody who's worked alongside pencil drafts people in an art department knows that there's partly it's a generational knowledge base that people who came up at that time had, which I think, and this is no denigration whatsoever to the 3D set designers that I work with constantly and are my companions and amazing and whatever. So I don't mean it that way, but there's a knowledge of just basic construction of the set, of like how this will really get put together, in a kind of a slightly more hands-on way because of the experience that people had, even if they weren't art directors, dealing with the foreman on set of how are you going to actually put the nails in the wood and make it happen. But also just the like, for example, you went to architecture school, but I don't know, and I have not, right? But I don't know how much you guys study traditional, cornice moldings and Baroque, decorations and the kinds of things you often need for movies, right? That you are so not popular in real architecture. I don't know how much that's studied anymore, but people in movies of that older generation of pencil pushers, they knew that stuff. They came up with it,
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that because there was certain things that were lost just when I was going into architecture school, right? So, and it was similar, for example, we did learn about all the because we knew that architecture was based on art history, right? So you need, in order for you to do what you do now, you have to learn how you got here, right? So that was a good journey you have to take in terms of style. But in terms of skill sets, I was the first class in architecture school that did not have to learn how to letter, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Right. So lettering is something that architects, as in architecture school, literally would learn how to write. It was like a calligraphy class you had to take every morning, and didn't have to do it because they said you're probably never going to have to hand draft ever, right? Because at this point, CAD is going to take over. They already knew that.
Yeah.
And so CAD was still like the new thing. I was still drafting by hand because, honestly, it was fun.
Yeah.
But I was doing CAD as well. I was the the digital guy, at architecture school, but we did not have to learn how to letter. And so that was like a moment. They're like, you're never going to have to letter again.
Yeah.
And if you look
It's
at
a
old
turning point.
architects and you look at how they write a check, it's like beautifully written.
It's beautiful. I know. Handwriting definitely has been lost in our culture in general. It's so
Yes,
sad when you
exactly.
find old
So
letters
you're
written
right.
by people in York.
There is certain skills that are gone,
Done.
from that process.
I also think, just to give another example, like let's say you are working on a medieval castle or a Gothic, piece of architecture, whatever it is. There's a shorthand way to represent all that decorative detail, whether it's a sculptural figure that's holding up a bracket or whatever it is. There's a shorthanded way of sketching that in a 2D world that you can imagine doesn't translate to the 3D world, right? Now
Right.
suddenly you're expecting your 3D set designer to what? To know ZBrush and to like pose a cherub in a specific beautiful pose
Right.
to hold. No, like either they're either not going to do it or they're going to do kind of like the ham-fisted version of it in 3D because it's a pain in the ass in 3D, right?
Right.
So but someone traditionally could just note that down, and then a sculptor who's equally trained in all the details of what that cherub should look like because of their training, right? Would jump in and take it over and push it. So I guess what I'm saying in a long-winded way is that there was, in the more traditional world where number one, I love the fact that the digital world of everything empowers one person to do so much stuff, right? That's kind of what digital technology does, is it super empowers the individual. But there was something about the old ways that worked in the sense that each person knew what they needed to know and convey just enough information to the next skilled person that they can then finish it, as opposed to the explicitness and the detail level of a digital world where it almost demands that everything be really figured out all at once. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I see.
So-
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe
You're
I'm
right.
just making a
The shorthand is
but
a thing, right? The shorthand is the thing, right? There's a way to just like, I get it. It's a boat. It's a car, right? Whatever,
Yeah.
and you can do that in 3 brush strokes, right?
Well, exactly.
And then otherwise, like, no, you got to go to Turbo Squid, download a boat, find out, like, is it going to work? It's like,
Yeah.
you just made it a lot more complicated. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
true. I
So,
never thought about it that way, but that's great.
But that being said, I mean, look, I'm the first one to love the total anal retentive control that you have now to work with a super talented person in SolidWorks, for example, and make the model absolutely perfect. And then you work with either that person or somebody else in Keyshot and with Photoshop Paint or whatever to just tease something into looking exactly the way you want it to look, all within the art department, all in the digital world. I love that level of control too. So I can see it from both sides.
Yeah. So you continue to use that kind of workflow that was working very much closer with the post world, right? You kind of you always had that mentality of like, I'm doing it in previs, but I know that what I'm doing in pre-production, but I know that everything I'm doing in pre-production is going to help people in post-production. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to make that gap and bridge
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
So
well, to finish the point about Joe Kaczynski and Darren and the way they set things up on Tron. So at a certain point in time, when the main art department went to the production location in Vancouver, we, the people that you saw at DD, we split off and formed that kind of splinter visual effects facing art department. And I think having a dedicated, visual effects art department effectively is what we were, that had the cultural experience of being within the production, but now we're literally co-located with the visual effects artists. That was an amazing, smart move. I think you benefited from it. I think we did too, because it was the ultimate zero communication gap, because we were sitting next to one another, and every time we handed something off, we could have an in-person meeting about it. Like, oh, here's this new model, and someone would ask a question. Some visual effects person would say, well, why is that piece missing back there? And be like, oh yeah, I didn't think to point that out. You're right. We owe you another piece back there, or that's being worked on
even
right now,
or even like a rig.
Process.
Yeah, if you had a spaceship that you design, is like the rigging department goes like, how's this supposed to work?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So
they may say like, can we trim off this little corner to enable this piece to not collide with something else as it pivots? Right. And you can just in one fell swoop just be like, oh yeah, I apologize. Absolutely, yes, go for it. And then there's no rendering versions and worrying about it and all that shit.
Yeah. It was really, really beneficial. And you guys continue to do that. Obviously, that exercise continued when you guys worked on Ender's Game too, right? So you guys were both. Didn't you work on Ender's Game? Yeah.
Yeah. So I co-production designed Ender's Game with Sean Howarth,
Yeah.
who's a terrific guy, and so that was unusual in that it was at the time a DD production, right? DD was one of the producing entities and put money
Right.
into it and everything else. So we were at DD in pre-pro, which is obviously super unusual, right? We're and Gavin, the director, was there, and we were all trying to work up this pitch package to attract other investors basically and other partners, and eventually when that went, we went off to New Orleans and shot down there, but we were at DD at the beginning, and I think we were at DD at the end, but not as much as we were on Tron. It wasn't. I mean, I think Tron was quite well budgeted. I mean, Ender's Game was cost some money to make, but it didn't. It wasn't the same thing. So we kind of remotely were doing post contributions, from home kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for sure, I mean, it was the same process in the sense that, I think as somebody who's been exposed to kind of a lot of aspects of I mean, there's so much about filmmaking that I don't know and will never know, and it's kind of sad. But anyway, I've at least been exposed to a lot of the kind of the handshakes and the way that information is shared between different parts of a production on the digital side, especially. I've made it my process or my mission to kind of, in whatever I'm doing, to really try to help that sharing. You know what I mean? So
Right.
as a production designer, I take that seriously. But even when I was an illustrator, I always thought it would be, I almost looked at it as a privilege to be able to communicate directly with the visual effects team, the people who are designing, doing the final modeling on the robots on Transformers, or whoever it was I was working with, to have a personal, direct relationship with those people, to save out the models in the most careful way possible so that it's clear and it doesn't break, to make sure that they import it properly, to communicate all that intent. To make people's lives easier down the other end. And it's a privilege in the sense that you're in that way able to control the outcome also, you know what I mean? So,
Right.
So as a production designer, I try to take pride in the ability to save things out properly, share the information, and, do video conferences. And I'll say that the process on Avatar has been awesome, with Weta Digi.
Right.
We everything we hand off, we do our best to package the 3D and package the refs that go with it and this, that, and the other. But they have a process of making these ref package PDFs where they kind of boil it all together into something and bring their own reference. And Michael Smale is the guy who works there, who's doing a great job, bring their own reference to bear and put it all into one package of like, here's all the information. Do you approve it? Are we ready to go? And it's like, no, like change this reference for that reference. And then, so no modeler or texture artist or whatever is starting on it prematurely before you've really communicated everything. It's really smart. So,
Okay. And that's worked. I mean, obviously that's working pretty well. So that
so
communication
far it's great.
with visual effects. Now that obviously that has a lot to do with the fact that you came from the visual effects world, or you understood the digital effects world, right? So, do you find that there are more people like you that have a background in CG or in visual effects that are in the art departments now, that communication is becoming easier and better?
I think at this point, I mean, it's certainly on Avatar where we had the pick of the litter, so to speak, in terms of hiring, and we specifically chose people who were a little more digitally savvy, a little more 3D oriented. Yeah, I mean, the name of the game these days is, as an illustrator or designer, is to just be kind of flexible and to know a lot of different techniques, right? So,
Right.
you can imagine the skill sets that were brought to bear were pretty mighty indeed. We've had, can't say enough good about the people in our art department and the process of co-designing with Dylan Cole, under Jim, on
Right.
this amazing thing. But basically, yeah, I mean, to make a long story short, I would say that everybody has some kind of 3D skills. I mean, they're, and I think take a genuine interest in pushing the technological levels of what design and illustration are. I mean, every time I turned around, somebody had learned how to sculpt in VR and we're doing like amazing stuff. And then before I know it, 3 guys in the same room are all wearing VR goggles at the same time. And
Wow.
they're all in Gravity Sketch doing, not messing around, but doing fundamental hard design problem solving,
Right.
using VR. And nobody told them to do that. They just kind of did it. So that's the great thing of the openness and freedom of the art department world, where you don't have to. I mean, it's a disadvantage in the certain sense that it's kind of the Wild West and it's chaotic.
Yeah.
Nobody uses the same package. File transfer is always a pain in the ass, this and that and the other. But it's the Wild West in a good way, in that it's it's kind of like an incubator for people to just screw around and come up with new techniques, because it doesn't matter. There's no pipeline. The only pipeline is cool pictures and decent 3D geo going out the door,
Right.
But everybody, everyone got into the GPU rendering thing. Everybody started to, getting these. Suddenly, computers went from, in the old days, a $6,000 computer. Somehow it got down to $2,000, and now it's gone back up to $15,000.
Yeah,
everyone's
because
got
of
these
GPU costs.
massive racks of GPUs.
Yeah.
But people are playing.
But that's interesting because, like you said, I remember, I'd visited you at one point, and we were talking to a bunch of freelancers that or people that were working on Avatar, and everyone had their own computer, right? So it was their own system.
Literally.
And because that's you hire me, and this is my my drawing pads, basically. It's
That's
a computer.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they would buy these extensive computers. There was no pipeline. It was whatever you did, as a library of stuff that I have, right? Who was it? God, I forgot. Anyway, he just basically is like, here's all my stuff, and when I got to do something, I can just kit bash from this, or I have this, and it was like a process and his own scripts.
It might have been Fausto.
It was Fausto.
Yeah. Fausto
and,
is MVP number one on my tech design side on Avatar. He's been with us for so many years, and he's still with us now. So
right, but it was that kind of attitude. It's like, okay, so it's not, there's no pipeline. But it's everyone
like a
makes their own personal
pipeline,
right? And so that was like, oh, that's interesting. And so when I was talking to some of those guys and helping them out with some of the stuff, I was like, oh, I need a specific tool for my pipeline or what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But what's also interesting is that somehow you are also kind of integrating yourself into the visual effects process, which has a much more rigorous pipeline.
Yeah.
So that handoff, like, is there a way that you found that's like, okay, no matter what, we can do all this crazy stuff on our own, but at some point we got to go bloop to something that's digestible to the process.
The main thing is just to test it out, because so
Right.
on that same guy, Michael Smale at Weta Digi, we asked him early on to make us a table of the different file formats that they wanted.
Right.
And that included things like, if somebody's native Max or native Cinema 4D or whatever it is, do you want that scene file as well? Just so you have the raw thing. One day if somebody gets hit by a bus, and you would at least have the real thing with the original material pathing and all that stuff, right?
Right.
So what we have is a table that he made that tells us which formats to save things out in. And so everything goes out in Alembic and FBX and OBJ and some of the basics. But then you've got native, if something was done in CAD, you've got a native Rhino or a native SolidWorks or native whatever it is, along with it. So they're kind of, as fully equipped as they can be, and they're within their rights to come back to us and say, this is corrupt, we can't open it or whatever. But by basically sending it out in so many flavors to begin with, we ensure that doesn't happen, and it hasn't happened once.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what was interesting to me as well, especially when I was on Tron, I was looking at stuff. One of the biggest reasons why you guys have to have your own personal little process that you do your things is the turnaround is so fast. You've got to come up with an idea and build it, texture it, project it, put it together with bubble gum and duct tape, whatever it takes, and have it rendered in almost real time to put it in front of someone's idea. Like, that's it. And then, so the iterative process of the design is what's very interesting. So how has that technology changed over time to make that process much faster for you?
Well, I mean, just to use Fausto as a great example of somebody who has a very developed personal pipeline, I think the thirst, and this is again part of the cultural transition to digital in art departments and in productions in general, has not just been about going from traditional set design to CAD, but obviously there's an expectation now. The Photoshop illustration revolution, and then the 3D feeding into that. There's an expectation that things should look pretty finished and pretty real, right?
Right.
And I'm sure that's true of like architecture clients in the real world now too, right? That nobody basically knows how to read a plan anymore. People want, they want, it's the show me state, right? Everybody wants to see what it's really going to be like, or they don't know what you're talking about, right? It used to be that people knew what a sketch was, and now they don't, apparently. So,
wow.
I think there's something lost there. I mean, and I'll give, a shout out to Jim Cameron, who, because he's an artist, and can just sit down and draw really well. Like he can engage in critiquing a design, I think, in any level of presentation. Like you could draw something with a pencil and he'll understand what you mean. You could do the most finished render in the world and he'll get into that too. He will not be swayed into liking something just because it's well rendered at all.
Right.
He will happily reject some of the most amazing art ever because something is just conceptually off about it or whatever that is. So there are people who I think can see through the code of the matrix and can understand a design intent from any media or from any presentation. But that's not the norm. I mean, I think in general, and this is not. It's not really a criticism exactly, but it is a shame on some level. Just that we are now all forced to operate at this kind of photoreal level all the time, like from presentation number one. And I don't think that's necessarily as true in games. I don't know why I'm saying that. I guess I'm just thinking of the amount of game artists I see online that have a more drawn style. That's just awesome. I mean, I love looking at art that's not as literal as the stuff that we have to do, but we're in that world, and so. I guess when you look at like a Fausto, he's got systems in place for working quickly where, the system incorporates the look dev, so to speak, right? So he's got terrific, metal shaders with edge wear and all this stuff built into them. He doesn't have time to UV stuff and take it into substance and paint it up, whatever. He literally just doesn't have time. So he can use his kit and use his shader setups that are really richly developed. And they're very well organized, by the way. I mean, like you probably saw
it.
Like all his kit bash parts are all in different categories, and he's got it all visually browsable, and it's amazing. And I know I'm focusing on Fausto, but I if anyone else is listening, I love all the rest of the art department people too. But anyway, so what that allows him to do is essentially throw stuff together, throw some design spit on top of it, and come up with a composition, and then it's essentially. Within 20 minutes, he can have some shaders chucked onto it and have a presentable by modern standards image, right? So that's what you're talking about. So, And
it was really surprising to me because, I would look at the image and that's a thing that's also it was almost like hilarious to me because I was like, wow, that's a great image. I get it. Totally get it. And then you'd hand me the file. I'm like, this is a mess. But it looks so good. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's how I got it done so fast, But it's that process of like, because I would never have, I would have worked to make it finished, right?
That's right.
And then I realized like, I'm probably spending hours to finish it when I really just need to get to that point and then render it and then little Photoshop on top and you're done,
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I get it now. And it was one of those things I was like, right. Now I understand how you guys are doing it so fast because it is the especially in what you guys are doing. It's the idea of getting an idea out, right? It's not about the execution. It's like, do you get the idea? Yes, I do. Okay, you can take it over from here, but I expressed that idea and I got it out as fast as possible, right?
Yeah.
It's a really kind of a different mindset to think about.
Well, and don't forget that within the art department, there are people who are much more nitty gritty in the same sense that some visual effects artists will have to take a rough model and turn it into something that has right topology and good UVs and everything else before you can put it into the movie. There's CAD modelers and set designers, pardon me, who have to do all that same stuff to, in some ways, an even higher tolerance level in order to manufacture things, right?
Right.
Imagine the amount of work that it takes to get that down to 3D millable geometry that is going to be watertight when you stick it back together and all that kind of stuff. So I guess for me, the pleasure of being a production designer and kind of working across the whole department and seeing all these different processes and seeing things go to the digital side and go to the practical side, because there's a lot of pleasures to really building stuff too. Is I think just getting to see the different temperaments that people have creatively and kind of technically, and how they each bring something to the process that's unique, and how you kind of need all of them.
Right.
It's kind of what I was talking about a little bit with the example of the traditional set designer handing off a rough something to a sculptor who then knows what to do and kind of runs with it. Right. It's not that way anymore exactly, although those things still go on. But in the in the digital realm, even you have a sort of a baton passing process that happens where each person adds their own expertise to it, and that gets right down to you've got I'll give an example. As far as I know, a unique example, but probably will become more and more common. Our painter in New Zealand on Avatar, Ali Mar, is both a traditional paint supervisor and worked at Weta as a look dev texture guy for many years. So
Wow.
he literally talks both languages. Like I can sit there with him critiquing something and to one of his crew, and I'll be like, dude, it's like it just needs more breakup in the spec map, like some kind of typical CG shorthand thing. And
Right.
he can then literally translate as if it's a language to let's try this glaze applied with a sponge or whatever the hell the actual real world equivalent is, which is great.
That's
But
interesting.
you have all those physical crafts where people are adding to the process and having to do interpretation and everything else too down the pipe. And so anyway, I just it's funny that everyone has their own temperament, everyone has their own pace. If you look at a person individually, you're sort of like, oh God, this guy's slow, or that guy's fast, or this guy gets impatient, or and I'm saying guy in gender generic. Don't think that I'm only talking about men. But what's cool is that when you really look at the end of the day, to what everyone's contributed and the way they've shared files and the way that they've built one thing on top of the other, if you as the production designer are doing your job of making sure that at each transition, at each handoff, it's getting better and not worse, then it's incredible what everybody contributes to it. And you can only get to like a super high level of product at the end of the day through the efforts of all these different types of people. So it's just fun, again, that's that Wild West thing. Like, it's not like there's some regulations in the union that we need a certain bunch of personality types like this and a certain number like that. It just happens automatically that in the community of people who are attracted to design and visuals, you get all kinds, and they all serve their purpose. I'm sure that's even true in visual effects facilities, right? That you have your specialists,
of course,
who are really great at this one thing.
What is interesting, though, in the visual effects world, and what's becoming more popular, and I don't think anyone really suspected it, is that generalists are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Because generalists seem to like it's kind of like a Fausto situation. It's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
And they have enough stuff that they can make it happen. They don't have to go through a million pipeline process. And the generalists are becoming popular as these MacGyvers, who can go in and take care of things. And I think that's an interesting idea as well.
I think a generalist, and at least to use Fausto as an example, a generalist is someone who's impatient enough to want to get the thing done, and not let the process get in the way, not get hung up. And so as someone with that mentality or that temperament, you're going to develop tricks and you're going to develop shortcuts that work well enough, and you're going to develop it among the different crafts that digitally kind of add up to a finished product. And so it's kind of a level of kind of urgency and impatience that is very useful. But you need the other people too. You need the finishers. You need the people who can meticulously make something perfect too. It's just you need to use the right gear for the right task. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you, I know you can't really talk too much about what's, things that are currently in production, but I'd like to know what you think, how the role of the art department has changed, or do you think it will change, where it's going to go, where virtual production is becoming a bigger part of the process, and how art departments are now sort of involved in that. Like, what's that like, and how is that going to change things?
Yeah, well, no, it's a pretty amazing opportunity, I think, for art people to get their hands dirty again, so to speak. And when I say again, it's a little bit because it's a return to the old days in a certain sense. That there was a lot more. There was a time back in the day, the studio system in Los Angeles, where you'd be an art director for the studio. You'd walk around a lot and you'd supervise the construction of 10 different sets for 4 different movies at the same time, et cetera, right? And there was a kind of a crafty, hands-on kind of quality to how you'd get that done,
Right.
And I think that pulling, and also just in traditional filmmaking, there was a level of commitment you had to make that you just didn't have digital effects to fix everything later. You had to come up with really clever physical tricks of using mirrors or using whatever the hell, foreground miniatures, all the great stuff that we look back on and revere, all had to be done because it just had to be in camera. It just had to get done that way. And so I think I'm excited by virtual production in the sense that it brings some of that kind of hands-on craftiness that you need to have, and also the commitment to Like we just rolled on that shot, and it was like the LED screen was displaying. It was displaying, and guess what? It's done.
Right.
There's no going back.
Yeah.
I think there's different types of virtual production. Certainly, on Avatar, we're striving for the absolute pinnacle of every aspect of what it takes to make a convincing performance and 3D image and everything else, right? So we're using technology in this kind of open-ended way, where you kind of always keep the balls in the air all the time. You always have options. You can always come up with a new virtual camera and all that. And that's kind of what it takes to finesse things to the level that Jim wants. But I do think there's something cool about, it's a little more old school, that with virtual production a la Mandalorian, it's like, nope, sorry, we shot it. Like it's done.
Right.
So I think that's cool. And I can't talk specifics.
You can't talk specifics, but
no. But even about Mandalorian, I know a cool Mandalorian anecdote that I shouldn't know about.
Okay,
so it's like double that I'm not supposed to talk about.
But you are making things. You are making things basically that are going into shots, right? And they are being shot in live or real time, right?
Absolutely. I mean,
so that's an
enormous construction on Avatar. Yeah, you wouldn't think so. You would think that the lessons of the first movie, of how much we spent, how much time we spent, in the natural world of Pandora, and how much we intercut between live action sets and it sort of never jarred people really. I think it worked really well. You'd think like, okay, well, we now believe in the visual effects tech, rendering hard surface stuff. Like any visual effects artist will tell you that rendering hard surface stuff and shading it, whatever, is just a lot easier than complex organics, right? Right before they tell you that it's too expensive to do such and such thing digitally, and you need to build it because it's really hard to do. Right. They'll say both things, but anyway, the truth is that Jim, I think, just feels that he needs the live action, or that it's beneficial to the live action to anchor the film, to make it look, to help the audience believe that it's all real. That's the reason we have live actors too, portraying humans. It lays down a foundation so that number one, so that the visual effects has something to live up to. Number two, so that your brain just kind of accepts the reality and will forgive the visual effects in the rare occasion that they fall down. And I think he just kind of likes it, truthfully. I mean, he's a filmmaker. He likes having real sets and real actors and just doing some of that stuff too. So we've built a lot more than I would have expected.
That is interesting. And I also think it's interesting, the other thing that's and you hinted at it just earlier, is like, you're not delaying the decision making. You have to make a decision now because it's going to be done. Right? It's going to be done. Say, that's right. Yeah, we'll just put a green screen back there and then we'll figure it out later. It's like just delaying that having to make the decision right then and there.
Well, also we have simulcam, right? So I mean, we're a thoroughly virtual production, both in the sense that we do, full blown. I mean, I guess there's debate. I've heard you even debating it on one of your podcasts about what is virtual production? What does that term mean?
Right.
Obviously, it can mean different things, And so, in the Avatar sense, on the one hand, it means the full blown performance capture process, right? Where you stage every damn bit of the action that you need. Even if it's background, even if it's horses being ridden, even if it's whatever, you don't animate it if you can possibly help it. You stage all that stuff with virtual, not virtual, so proxy sets, gray sets, and everybody kind of knows what that looks like. That being said, you will be amazed at the size and complexity of some of the gray sets that we built on the sequels, like major, expensive, engineered steel, like big stuff, like pretty crazy stuff. But I think I lost the thread of what I was going to say. What was I going to say? I'm sorry. Simulcam. So at the same time, we're taking full advantage of the fact that we have this virtual camera capture system, right? So there's lots of live action sets that we built that Jim encountered for the first time, so to speak, as a filmmaker by scouting them virtually, right? So we, on Avatar, we've got the art department, but then we've got what is sometimes called a virtual art department, which we call the lab, or the environments team within the lab is really more accurately what it is. And so, we hand off things to them long in advance of worrying about handing off the model to visual effects. We're handing it off to the lab, which is its first chance to get ingested into the whole system, right?
Interesting.
So that they make it into a real-time, lighter version. In some cases they've made gorgeous real-time assets that are like up to the level of good game assets almost.
Right.
And so the virtual, between what they've done and the Gazebo real-time render that we use, which is a proprietary Weta Digi thing,
Right.
some of our virtual looks good. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Right.
But basically, so Jim has already encountered a lot of these sets virtually before he ever saw them in person, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So what that allows us to do in some cases, we've never done this perfectly, but in a perfect world, you would literally have him scout it and then debate with him what the extent of physical build would be standing out there in the volume, right? Like, okay, Jim, here's our proposed, all right, switch the visibility, show the extent of build, and have him experience that out in the volume. We never actually did that. We were fully prepared to, but it just didn't have the time. But effectively, we've designed these environments as full virtual worlds first. Then you debate endlessly, including debates with visual effects and debates with your own budget and everything else. What are we going to build? What do we need to build? What can we afford to build, et cetera? And then later on, the part that's not what you built, right, becomes the simulcam package, so to speak, for what's running virtually in his tracked camera on the day, right?
Okay.
So a lot of effort actually, like for getting ready for a live action day on Avatar has been not just making sure the physical set is ready, which is of course the priority, but making sure the simulcam is right. Because sometimes he's got stuff that he needs to be framing for, right? That's totally critical to, either the architectural composition of something or characters, more importantly, obviously characters walking through, et cetera. That's got to be sussed out really nicely, or else he's framing the wrong thing. So it's virtual even on the days when we're shooting live action, big time.
Right. That's interesting. I find it, I find that the world of the virtual sets are going to become much more important. Things have to be more real time. And so there is going to, I think what virtual production is going to do, it's going to bring back some of those sensibilities of traditional filmmaking, right? And
I think so.
you're not going to be stuck in this thing where it's like just wait and go into process and wait, have one version a day, right? Because that's the way the visual effects world is. It's like, no, you're going to have, 100 versions in a day because you need to get it right then and there. And it's that there's time and money spent on sets. And now suddenly you have to, that has to be a process that's going to be very interesting. So I think the roles of art departments are going to become very, very interesting. And people that work in art departments are going to have to be savvy enough to be like, yeah, no, build it. It's like you're building the thing, You're the designer and the carpenter at the same time.
Well, exactly. I mean, like someone in that position has to say simultaneously, like walk over to a set painter and be like, you need to, whatever, you need to weather this down with some kind of rusty, oily composition in this corner, whatever it is, and then walk over to an Unreal artist and say, you need to again, like I said before, you need more breakup in the spec map. You've got to be talking both languages all of a sudden, and which is I think that's cool. And I would say that a lot of more modern art department people, I think, are pretty well equipped to do that.
Right. Well, I'm glad we're finally able to do this podcast. We're just over an hour, and as we mentioned before, we are going to do another podcast once Avatar comes out, so we can talk more details.
Yes,
about that, obviously, which is going to be very exciting. But it's cool that we finally did this. It's interesting now that I'm doing these remotely. I'm actually getting a lot more people that are like, "Oh yeah, I guess I'm stuck at home. I can do a podcast."
Yeah. Perfect opportunity. Well, thank you for pursuing me for such a long time. I'm sorry that I've probably flaked out a little bit here and there in terms of getting this going, but I'm very happy to do it, and I will have endless things to talk about Avatar in much more detail.
Yeah,
later on.
It's been your life for 7 years.
It has been, yeah, and who knows when it's going to
end. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, great. It's been really fun. Thank you so much.